Okay, so I graded the Espionage Act to come in, and there was a lot of points, and you know, like they give you time and that kind of thing. Your hybrid is all it's all very difficult. That ends Monday.
Let's go.
And it starts. Then if you haven't turned it in, it becomes a 0. Yes.
How many people are going to be in this class? Yet?
Right now, we're going to do about 25, 26. But there might be a few. I have a feeling that a few people who went DLI, it's going to be tough for them to come back. Because they've been, even if, you know, the people here are working their tails off DLI. You know, you get used to just, you know, talk about that or whatever. Maybe, it'll be a shock, but it'll be kind of weird having everyone back. And, but still with masks, with all just weary guys. Don't you wish we all had big guys? That would be so. Imagine those with a mask.
Is this going to be how it is, or is there going to be glass?
No glass. They spread everything out really well. I'm gonna have to figure out how many. I'll have to redo. I'll have to see each chart. You know, won't be that big of a deal.
I say if there's too many people who just like alternate seats in the hall.
No, go out the window. I just open them.
Huh?
Trust me, if I could do that to you, I would. But somebody would get mad.
I take the rainy days.
So this is the real deal. Oh, let me talk about the Espionage Act really quickly. The Espionage Act, most people did quite well on it. My laptop was acting up when I was trying to grade it. I had to do it on my iPad, so my comments are going to be a little. But most people did quite well on that. I get thought through. I gave a little explanation for the 3 reasons. And a few people said that 20 years and $20,000 wasn't enough to deter people. Well, maybe the most devout spies or somebody trying to overthrow the government, remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be the United States, it doesn't say the U.S. They might not be deterred, but most people don't want to go to jail. This might shock you. So it deters most people, not the most devout. Which should tell you everything you need to know about the Espionage Act. It was never designed to get them. It's designed for social unity, to force people to conform. And there's something else. A lot of people put down that people would protest in the streets. And I know we'd all like to think that we love our freedom and we would fight for them. And I think some would. But you'd be shocked how many wouldn't. And especially when this law is still on the books. Even though it's basically only enforced against reporters, but it was enforced a lot. Oh yeah, they just shut reporters up. Whoever's in power hates the media. You'll find that out.
Someone in power shut down reporters, that's so sad. Because we got an officer.
She doesn't like me, without a doubt. He doesn't talk to me.
And he body slammed that.
Well, he did try to kill me. Yes.
That's
But
what I was
he-
referring to. But
So he got slightly more than anybody hit myself.
don't
Trust me.
Don't forget he lied about his employment. Can't forget that part.
Money can buy you a lot of things. So back to this. Back to this stuff. People say that, and it's on the books. And one thing about this, and I might have taken a point off of this. If anybody says, but today we love our freedoms, implying they didn't then. What? The whole country is based upon that. Yes, they loved them, even though a lot of people didn't have them. And don't forget something. You guys have less civil liberties than I did when I was your age. They weren't spying on me all the time. They didn't have back doors to know everything I was doing when I was your age. That didn't exist. Not only do they do it now, but it is protected. You guys have a lot more controls on you. And so, yes, we love our freedom, then why do those controls still exist? Because obviously the majority of the population does not want to force politicians to change those political decisions. Now you can say, I want to be spied on, that's a good thing. Fine. But then don't say that we love that. And that's something, you gotta think about a little bit more. And one more thing. One of our rights and speeches and freedoms that we take for granted is this whole idea of being able to vote. But remember what I told you, you have no right to vote. And that's happening right now. In states across the United States, there are over 250 laws, including in Montana, to do everything possible to restrict the right to vote. In fact, this is unprecedented. It has not happened like this since the Jim Crow era. It's happening right now. It's happening in Montana. To do everything they can, especially college students. Boy, they want to keep college students. And that is the government right now. And I mean, there are people that are just furious about this, but most seem to be perfectly fine with it. And if you think, oh, people be rioting in the streets, that's kind of a big deal. By the way, what they're going to do is make it harder for college students to vote, absentee, to register, say to register and IDs. In Montana right now, they're all going to have this. They're trying to keep people from voting. And I agree with you. I'm looking around at these people. Yeah, you shouldn't vote. It should all be up to me, right? Yes, old people like me who will lead you.
I didn't beat you.
Thanks a lot. No, actually, it's pretty disturbing. So I want you to think about that. By the way, this is actually a big deal. In every state, in like Georgia, they're basically just it's gone back to 1800. Georgia, and it's specifically in Georgia, it's without a doubt to keep African American. They're doing everything they can to stop them. Everything they can. They're not even hiding. It's like, I've never seen anything like it, but it can happen because the way the laws are today, the courts. And in Montana, a lot of it is to keep American. And you can also call the party in power by that. So this is a big deal. And so I didn't take a lot of points out, but if you just blanketly put that down, that to me says, you don't really think about it. We all want to think we are so superior and smart now. And yes, we are superior and smart in here, but out there, no. No, but don't we all like to think that. That's an element of what old people like me, thank you again, we do the, in my day, we had it tough. It's the same kind of thing. We are so smart today, you were so dumb. You didn't even have a computer. We're so smart. Which also makes me laugh, because then, okay, then make one. Let's get to Russia. Now, don't forget that. You have no right to vote. They can take that away. They don't have to count your vote. And, okay, they as in politicians. And politicians decide the political process, which is by the vote. Oh, wait a second. They deprive people of vote. They give people power. This is an interesting thing. It's a circle. So back here. Speaking of this, we're making a war for democracy. And I went through all the reasons yesterday for the United States to go to war. First off, what did Germany begin in 1917? What kind of warfare? Yes.
Submarine?
Yeah, unrestricted submarine warfare. Yeah, but it is total war, but it's unrestricted. That's an element of it. Oh, I gave you the last horrific rule, so to speak, whatever you wanted, a total war. What was a horrible thing that was not justified? A total war.
Genocide.
Genocide, yes. So, we're doing the assignment now. This is like the second time in a row. And yeah, we'll figure it out. But this is the second time I've tried to try to do something else while I was up here. I take that as an insult to me. So back to this. So, genocide. And genocide, I just explained to you one very important thing. Isn't that exactly the reason for Japanese internment? You start looking for an enemy within, dissent within. Somebody who might be different and you don't trust them. So when I say Japanese internment, I'm already explaining to you why that. It happened here. Okay, also people in California want to take their land and their property. Yeah, so this is horrible. But it's the same argument. And they were put in concentration camps. It did not go to the state of genocide, but it was a big step towards it. And we see this other times down the road too.
That's years after years.
Exactly. And we'll see it against Germans in World War I. People with German names.
So, back to Russia. Oh, so we mentioned, the banks, talk about banks and bonds, remember that? And the U.S. ended the war, a little bit about trade. To make the world safe for democracy. If anybody did that thesis statement I gave you, and still want me to look at it, just please post it. DBQ. So, we talked about this yesterday, about Rasputin. By the way, I never told you how Rasputin died. A prince by the name of Yusupov, he was a nobleman about the decadent Rasputin. Everyone look into his eyes. Look, one more time. No matter where you're at in the room, he's staring at you, isn't he? He's got like the horrible Calhoun eyes. But we don't need to know him. I just I always forget his name, so I always have to type him in. So Yusupov, when he yeah.
So how do you write a thesis when is a thesis?
Well, it's not a thesis, it's a statement. So you take a position. And so the one I showed you, you just have to take a position on it. You agree with it or disagree. Or you agree with the part, and that's despite making the world safe for democracy, and then finish your and your position is going to be whether you agree or disagree. So, they decided he was such a corrupting influence on the crowd that they must kill him. So they set up a conspiracy by promising Rasputin, who drank more than anybody, ate more than anybody, caroused more than anybody. Women would just mob to him, thinking that he provided some kind of power, especially noble women of all ages. And he took advantage of that. But they said that Yusupov's wife would not like to meet him. And you think, oh, that's disgusting that her husband's setting up his wife. These are all arranged marriages, so don't get bogged down too much. But anyway, they plan to use more poison, arsenic, or cyanide, would kill 10 people. And they put it in wine. He liked sweetened wine, and these little cakes that he loved. They just packed him with it. And they brought him down to the basement of Yusupov's house. And he's like, where's your wife? It's all these kind of disgusting. But they said, well, first have these cakes. He didn't trust them. Why are you bringing me here? He's always thinking about this. But then he said, well, we got wine. Okay, he couldn't resist the wine. So he basically drank like half a gallon of water. Enough poison that would have killed 10 people. What happened? No. Yeah, nothing. They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. He just got a little drowsy. So Yusupov finally came down and shot him in the chest right here. He went down. And then they had this whole elaborate thing where they drove to Rasputin's house. Someone put on his cloak and acted like they walked in like him so he could say he went home. And then they're going to go get rid of the body. They went back downstairs to the basement. The body's there. And they're just about ready to pick him up, and Rasputin popped up. They started coming at him. So they shot him again and started beating him with a poker from the fireplace. They beat him nearly to death, drug him out of the house, laid him down, and it's like, we finally got him. And one more time, laying on his back, he went, at him. And they finally beat him to the quick. And then they drug him to the Neva River, threw him through a hole in the ice, and they found him a few days later. Now, we don't know if this is 100% true, but when they found the body under the ice, there were scratch marks on the ice, and his lungs were full of water. Look how badly they beat him. So Rasputin died, but it didn't save the monarchy. And that's why I told you, by the way, I love this picture. When he actually, this was the lurching, it was inside, but they have him outside lurching down the stairs. It's a good picture. So I think I mentioned this yesterday, the currency government, but they stayed in the war. So they stayed in the war. And that's the biggie, this republic. The U.S. claimed, hey, now we're for a republic democracy. There was a disastrous offensive in 1917. And with that led the October Revolution that happened in November. or sometimes called the Bolshevik Revolution. They were still on the old Julian calendar that lost a quarter day every year, and they never switched to the Gregorian calendar that we're basically on now, leap years. So they kept losing days. And after a couple thousand years, they lost about 3 weeks. So, Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks were radical communists who believed the only way to achieve perfect socialism was to overthrow the government by force. So actually, the Bolsheviks were overjoyed by the war. They thought the war would destabilize the monarchy and they could win. Their leader was Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was in exile in Switzerland when the war began. And he was overjoyed. By the way, Bolshevik means majority. So that is the majority of the people. It was actually only a cadre of about 2,000 people. It was a tiny party. But that was a great advantage. You have a tiny party of determined people, easier to keep secrets. Even though there are a lot of counter spies. They can watch tours. And the other thing is, this is not a mass revolution. Marx, socialist doctrine said workers would rise up, right? It's not that. This is going to be a tiny little group, and they would force the country to socialism. So, Lenin. Here's the problem Lenin had. Lenin's in Switzerland. Petrograd, the capital of Russia, St. Petersburg, the German name, so they switched to Petrograd. There's something in between Petrograd and Switzerland. If you look at the map, it could be anything. What's in between them? And Germany's at war with Russia. How do you get from Russia to, or Switzerland to Russia? Where? Find a lake and just swim around until eventually. Who would love Lenin to take power? Germany. Germany aided them as a measure of, okay, for some reason it's not a T-war, but total war. If they can get Lenin there, and Lenin could get a revolution, maybe Lenin will pull out the war. Lenin has been promising to end the war. The war is nothing but to help the capitalists get rich, a war of imperialism. Which, yeah, there's a huge element of truth there. So Germany helped them. They tried to keep it secret, but we all know now. Because Germany did not want socialist revolution in Germany. The largest socialist party in the world was in Germany. So, with that, they got him there. They tried it in August, it failed. But in November, October, however you want to look at it, it worked. It was a relatively bloodless revolution. A relatively bloodless. And they had a slogan, okay, relative, I know to the people who are there, it's not bloodless, but the current government just collapsed. And Bolsheviks just took over seats in government in Petrograd, and also kind of the sister religious capital called Moscow. They just basically took over. And basically, we're in charge now. And everyone's like, okay. That's kind of the way it happened. But their slogan was bread, land, or bread, peace, and land. And that should tell you everything you need to know. People were starving. They were tired of this war where millions had died or been maimed. And most peasants in Russia were still essentially serfs, kind of like sharecroppers, bound to the land. They just wanted a little piece of land. And that's what the communists promised. They promised this. And that seductive slogan would give them enough to get out of the war. Now, Lenin was in overall charge, but the leader of the forces was this man right here next to Lenin. He's also right here. His name is Leon Trotsky. But behind the scenes, someone who actually had almost nothing to do with the actual revolution, but a brilliant, hard-working man, was moving up in the system, and he's right there. Joseph Stalin. And we'll come back to Stalin. We can't escape Stalin, ever. He is still the most popular leader Russia had ever or will ever have. Which is shocking. Of course, you know the second most popular leader Russia ever had when they do polls? Ivan the Terrible. Russia. Okay, so what did they do? They had a revolution. Okay, I just thought this was fun. So Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and Castro. It just makes me laugh. Okay, it's the Communist Party. Get it? All right, so the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Russians pulled out of the war. They did what they promised. They pulled out of the war. This was, then, by all definition, a German victory. They won. They won in the East. By the way, them winning in the East might lead them to make certain conclusions that they could win again, and let me throw a year out, 1941. That's what we call World War II. But this was a draconian treaty. Look at all this land that Russia had to give up. Russia was treated worse than an average losing party. They lost a third of their agricultural land. And the plan was for Germany, there wasn't going to be part of Germany, they were going to make puppet states, like a puppet Ukraine. Today we call it Belarus, but it's White Russia, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, puppet states. That was their plan. But now, Germany can pull 1 million troops from here and bring them to the west. This is huge. So this was a big victory. Now, Lenin knew this would be problematic, but Lenin is figuring, I'll get it back someday, and more. Someday we got to end the war now. The Allies were furious. Oh, almost forgot something. The Allies were furious, but in Russia, it's going to lead to a horrific civil war, where both sides are going to adopt total war and tactics that are going to shock the world with the brutality of the torture of each other and also trigger a horrific famine. Russia is going to go through hell from about 1914, when the World War I began, till Russia, the 4 Russians. So the two sides were called, okay, the color of socialist revolution was more and more called the Reds. Red, the color of Patriot blood. And the hodgepodge of groups that fought them were called the Whites. Here's red propaganda, and here they are fighting the Whites, and you notice this is the capitalists, who got rich while others died. Here is a very confusing poster for the Whites. I'm not sure what's going on, but this is a dangerous revolutionary, the red. And here's the red flag, and handprint, you remember the black hand? That was a common symbol for any revolutionary. So they're trying to say that they're radicals. But some of the Whites wanted a republic, some wanted a monarchy. They're all over the place. Some just wanted like an independent Ukraine. So they're all over. The Whites did very well at first, but it's going to be a horrible war. But the Allies intervened. All of Germany's enemies intervened, furious of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And they all intervened to try to help the Whites win. They sent money, equipment, and troops. So, for example, Italian and French troops landed here, eventually. British troops tried to come up in this area right here. Japanese and American troops landed in Vladivostok, which is way over here on the Pacific. And U.S. troops landed in Murmansk to help the Whites. Now, failed. So, for example, the reason why is the fear of socialist revolution. Oh, sure, they wanted Russia back in the war. But they were scared. Remember, this is total war. What if Germany could somehow get a socialist revolution in France, Britain, the United States? Gee, I wonder about the Espionage Act. Does that make sense? Does it tie together? Most American troops went to Murmansk. Now, this map I put in here, I want to show how vast this really confusing war was. Murmansk is up here. U.S. troops, including these men right here, which are members of the Montana National Guard. They thought they were going to France. Austrians were equipped with a little bit heavier gear and sent about north of the Arctic Circle. Woohoo! They did have a few battles with the Reds, mostly as a truce, and they would be withdrawn. It did not work. The Reds won. Most Americans did not know this. In fact, my guess is very few, if any of you, knew this. Right? Did anyone know this before? A couple, maybe? And certainly you probably wouldn't have thought Montanans. But what country did they tell their children from day one that the Americans in the West invaded? All through the Cold War, what do you think every school child in Russia, and they joined a group called the Young Pioneers, which were like their Boy Scouts. And they all joined it. Didn't you? They invaded once before, and they're coming for you. And they still teach them that today. You can't trust the Americans. And that's one important thing about history, but also empathy. Knowledge and understanding of people you might, even if we're not technically in war, we have a slightly adversarial relationship with Russia. There's a reason why. They've been taught from day one, they hate you. Including members of the former Soviet secret police who just happen to run the country. Yes. There's some really funny pictures of Putin from 1985 when Ronald Reagan visited Russia, trying to act like a normal Russian. He's this young man acting, he's actually a spy. Really funny and creepy. It failed. Eventually the Reds would win. And in this horrific total war, where they tortured the enemy, I should add, they did murder the Tsar. They murdered the Tsar and his family. No, because they did not survive. Okay, she lives in hell with that now. But they created, eventually the country would be the Union of Soviet Socialistic Republics, or the USSR, or in Cyrillic it looks like to CCCP, it's actually kind of funny. And that's why they're called the Soviet Union. All Soviets mean like a group of workers, and they want to adopt that group. And their ultimate goal was socialism, where the workers would control the capital. And so the Communist Party would take over industry and they would control it. And in the long run, they would create this classless society. And that was their goal. And they believed they could make Russia do this, make them become industrialized and make them do it. But as I mentioned before they got there, and during the war, they had a dictatorship of the proletariat, that's of the workers, until they're ready for perfect socialism. The problem is, all the dictators adopted total war. They adopted all the bans of freedom of speech. They arrested potential enemies. They tortured them to death. They starved them. This war was so brutal. Did they quit this after the war? And when did the dictatorship of the proletariat end?
Not really. Putin's kind of a dictator.
Well, he's a true dictator, but there's no... Up until 1991, they acted like they're doing it for workers.
Yeah.
Now it's
plain.
he's just a dictator taking over money. It's a what we call a kleptocracy. You know what a kleptocracy is? You know what a kleptomaniac is? Somebody who steals. It's just a government that steals from these people. And a little group, cadre of rich people around. See who's watching. But oh no, they're not communists. They were really communists then, but they didn't end. They just kept the power and created a monstrous totalitarian state. And yeah, poor Russia. Poor Russia. But here's the thing about it. If I just told you their fear of socialist revolution, now they're the country that claims to be socialist. And they're the biggest country in the world. And something else. And they would prove it, as this picture shows. They're going to have an awesome military. Has anyone seen that picture before? Anybody know where? Anybody know what building that is?
Yeah.
What did you say?
Good.
Good guess, but no. It's St. Petersburg. Moscow? Kremlin?
That's right.
It's the Reichstag. That's 1945. And that's when they defeated Nazi Germany. Nobody thought anyone would beat Nazi Germany, especially the Soviet Union. They figured it just collapsed. They routed them. They beat them. I mean, the German army's back was broken before the U.S. entered in large numbers at all. Their back was broken. They were done. The Battle of Kursk in 1943. Wow, they scared. One more funny thing about this picture. Look at the destruction of Germany, of Berlin. You see, it looks like little, like his wrist or something on his wrist. It's filled with watches that he looted from Germans, alive and dead. One of those weird little quirky things of war. So, with that, back to the United States. Mobilization. We got to mobilize to ready for war. And the first big important thing is this is a problem right away. It's going to be incredibly expensive, especially for a country on the gold standard. We don't have the same constraints on debt today because we're not on the gold standard. But financing. They got to pay for the war. But remember the 16th Amendment allowed for an income tax. So they dramatically increased the income tax for high earners especially. The highest marginal income tax rate eventually would be about 70%. Now, I want to be very clear about it. These are marginal rates, and I will show you exactly how this works. But nobody paid 70%. We have marginal taxes today. That's not the way they work. But the thing is, they had a tax mode. So they had to pull money out of the economy to pay for this because they needed money backed by gold. But then they had to borrow most of it. That's bonds. Treasury bills. Here's a Liberty bond. Liberty bond where individuals could buy bonds and loan to the money, or loan the United States government money. And two things about that. First off, so you buy a bond, today there are savings bonds do the same thing. And they sell them as an investment for the people buying them. With the idea being, is that you give money to the government now, when it matures down the road, I don't know why I'm giving like 15 quotes, but matures, down the road, it'll be worth more money. That's plus the interest. By the way, if you have to borrow a lot of money all of a sudden at once, the government has to pay higher interest. And that will increase interest all over. When you have to borrow a lot of money and you're on the gold standard. Once again, we don't have, I mean, some of those constraints exist, just not near to the extreme. So, bonds. Before we get to inflation, but look how they sold them. After a Zeppelin raid in London, so it's good propaganda. A mother had done nothing wrong. I'm sorry, the mother had done nothing wrong. And she had. So their mom died in the Zeppelin raid. Prevent this in New York City. Buy bonds. But with demand for everything going up dramatically, the government paying top dollar now for steel, for food, for everything. Prices double in 1918, and then would double again in 1919. But add one more thing too. Add this. Consumer goods too. Consumer items like clothing, cars, even consumer food. They all went up dramatically in price. And look at it this way. If factories were once making cars for people, and they're going to be forced to quit making cars and make carriages for artillery, what's going to happen to the price of cars if no one is making them? Skyrocket. And that's what's going to happen for everything. So inflation is always a problem. They did a horrible job with inflation in World War I. They did a really good job in World War II. More knowledge about it, and then Franklin Roosevelt was more able. But they also began state control of the various economic systems. And they basically came in, the whole thing was, okay, we want to make sure that certain companies are producing the weapons we need, the equipment we need, no duplication, and nobody making consumer goods so they can take advantage of the high prices. We need weapons for war. And this is going to be dubbed war socialism. So the people who own the companies might not have as much control, but boy, they're going to clean up. And that's what our arms manufacturing is today. The manufacturers make a lot of money. There's not very many of them left because we have monopolies now. But they still got to produce what the American government wants, so to speak. We make an awful fighter plane called the F-35, and Northrop Grumman makes it, or Lockheed makes it, and We claim we won it, but I don't think we actually wanted a fighter plane that's worthless. Maybe they did, I don't know. But the most prominent would be the War Industries Board by Bernard Baruch. Bernard Baruch was a financier, and Wilson put him in charge because they thought a financier, somebody who was good at accumulating money, would be good at organizing this. And so they're going to take over this and go into you produce this, produce this, produce this, produce this. But here's the problem. A lot of companies resisted because they want to continue to make money selling consumer goods. And it was immediate, like all of a sudden, and it's never been done before, this body, this agency he would create, this board, controls everything. Can you imagine what would happen if you tried to all of a sudden, no prep, control the entire nation's economy? Just chaos. It didn't work. For a full year, it was a disaster. In fact, Baruch is going to be fired later on. And this is amazing. The United States, the largest economy in the world by then, did not begin to produce large amounts of weapons until January and February of 1919. Now, what's wrong with building lots of weapons by January and February of 1919?
It's a little off.
Yeah, the war's been over for 3 months. That's why we use French equipment. That's why we use British equipment. By the way, the British charge top dollar. They want to kind of connect some of the money back. But one board did work, the Food Administration. Hubert Heber would be in charge of this self-made engineer who would become wealthy. He was known as the great organizer. Heber organized food production, the salvation of food, and sending the food to Europe and the famine in Russia after the Civil War. He would come out with a great reputation, and I always mispronounce his name, so I just have to continually do it. It's Hubert Heber. And here is a picture of Heber, basically saying, no more can the rich go out to eat. We're saving food for the war effort. And millions would make sacrifices and work like planting a victory garden, like in the little backyards or on the roofs of buildings in big cities to supplement the food. Now, this did help. But the whole point of this is not to replace mass food production, but to get the feeling that we're all in this together. We're sacrificing. Remember what propaganda does. We're in this together. Speaking of that, the assumption was millions would volunteer for the army. They really thought that they'd be overwhelmed with volunteers. And they thought it would be like this. This is New York City 2 days after the war was declared. And look at all these young men so happy to go volunteer for the war. They assumed they would get 2 million volunteers. And they remembered how many people tried to volunteer at the beginning of the Spanish-American War. They just assumed so many people would volunteer. And there was some opposition. This actually was a very popular song. Sheet music was a big deal at that time. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier if you can't read it. Ah! This might shock you. Young men actually didn't want to go fight and die in the trench. They didn't want to be covered with lice or be covered with rats or basically sleeping in their own filth. No, they didn't want to do it. Nobody volunteered. Why? Well, a good reason is they made a rational decision. Put on the German plane. Remember total war. Almost immediately, when Wilson decided we're going to war, he assumed this is a holy effort to bring democracy to the world, and now people aren't joining the war. The Germans must already have a foothold. They're winning. If nobody's going to volunteer, then what do we have to do? The draft. By the way, don't you love this? Join the tank corps. Whatever about the tanks, but I just like the cats. So, selective service, the draft. But they knew, what if there's going to be anti-draft protesters? Like here, the war against the war. Or there's a peace march in Seattle, so naturally they sent the National Guard to rough them up and shoot them. How dare you want peace? So with that, and here's the other thing. Are anti-draft protesters, are they pro-German? Or are they believers in the democratic system that if you do not like a political decision, like going to war or starting a draft, you have the right to disagree and protest and assemble? Which isn't that kind of in the Constitution? Don't worry about that. Don't get yourself out there. Are they pro-German? What's that say again?
They're traitors to our country.
Are they traitors or are they true patriots who believe the country could be better than going to a war by choice? Well, what did Wilson do? Traitors. Traitors. The Germans must be winning. So here, oh, they gave every birthday a number, a random number, 1 to 365, and then you picked out the numbers in a fishbowl. If your birthday was that number, the lower the number, the odds are you're going. They just randomly gave them all. By the way, there is still registration for selective service today. And that's a legacy of the Cold War. Actually, a legacy of 1979, when the kind of like a third Red Scare was happening. It's still around, which is like, why? But it still is. So with that, what the cry for then? Wilson, this man, we need social unity. But I want you to think about something, what I just told you. Fear of socialist revolution. Nobody's going to the draft. Anti-draft protesting. Does the Espionage Act make sense to the way Wilson is thinking? We got to stop these people. Does it stop them? Oh, sure, it might stop the regular anti-war protesters. You're right. And so with that, a commission for propaganda was created. In fact, it was called the Committee of Public Information, which is really scary because that's a very French revolutionary sound. That's my guillotine sound. Like it. By the way, here's my Marie Antoinette doll. Who is it? So with that, yeah, the gruesome Marie Antoinette doll who was executed. The head used to shoot out like 3 feet. So immature people would shoot the head at people. Me, I would shoot the head of people. And now the head broke, so it only fits on backwards. So she was also possessed by the devil. Okay, so we'll finish this up tomorrow. Please read through the documents. Get the stuff in. Oh, if you have a paper copy of the Espionage Act, I will take it, but I think most of you turn it online.
And when is the DVD going to be?
Next week, I don't know. You'll be doing.
Oh, so we're not doing it tomorrow?
Oh, well, it doesn't. Oh, no, we're not doing it tomorrow. No, we're not doing it tomorrow. It's next week.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I gave it to you, so you had it, because we'll be finishing up the war. The war is going to end shockingly fast. And then the finish for side, we're all going to watch a movie. We got a bunch of stuff to do. And then I got stuff to give you. So what are we going to do the test? That works. Come on in. Have a good day, everybody. Oh, I'll keep turning the helmets up and we'll look at the helmets.
Show, 2006 called Coal House.
Coal House?
Yeah, they get family to go live in this like building in the conditions of like 1970.
Oh, wow. Just one sec, yeah?
I was just gonna ask if a helmet like that would like protect you from like the exploding or
That's what it's for, like hopefully a little bit from shrapnel.
Yeah.
The big piece is still right.
Yeah.
Just like a bullet.
Yeah.
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 Cool, I like to look at it. That's interesting.
And they actually
Ah, beauty.
Hello.
Look into the eyes.
So I have to leave right after class today to go up and see Miss Norman because I have to finish something for her. So
No, you gotta sit here and eat.
And when is the DBQ again?
It's gonna be next week. I just wanted to make sure I got the documents to you. I